Welcome to the Coptimizer Podcast, a platform dedicated to uncuffing your true potential in public safety. We're here to provide you with valuable tips and insights that will help you optimize your life and career. I'm retired Chief Patrick Flannelly, and I'm honored to be your guide and coach on this journey. Here, I'll share the latest insights and strategies to help you survive and thrive in the demanding world of public safety. Our noble duty is to protect and serve. We embody the role of peacemakers in our communities. However, this profession's immense physical and mental demands come with a price. If we fail to take a proactive approach for our well-being and lead ourselves first, then the stress from the job can and will lead to poor health outcomes. We have all seen it play out. Not only does this impact our professional and personal lives, but it also affects our ability to fulfill this sacred duty. Like many of you, my journey has been filled with tremendous challenges, with highs and lows. However, through creativity, experience, and a positive attitude, I successfully managed over 30 years in law enforcement, emerging healthy and happy. Now, I am driven to share what I've learned to show you that the path is not all doom and gloom. There is hope and a profound purpose in serving your community, and I'm here to show you that it does not have to come at the cost of your health and well-being. Join us as we explore cutting-edge research, interview top experts, and share inspiring stories of transformation. Whether on duty or off, it's time to optimize your potential and live your best life. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. This is the Coptimizer Podcast. Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. As usual, I'm excited about our guest. This is one I've been looking forward to for a while, and for a lot of different reasons, but everyone kind of knows I'm into individual optimization, organizational optimization, but I'm also kind of a data geek. I'm not a data scientist by any stretch of the imagination. Jeff Asher, thank you for being here. Appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us.
Thanks for having me.
So you are the author of the Substack, Jeff Analytics, which I love that little play on words.
It's terrible when you say it out loud. It says in my head.
Listen, you're talking to someone that's on the Coptimizer podcast. I liked the play on words. I thought it was very clever and unique. But I digress. So where are we talking to you from?
I'm in New Orleans.
And you write a lot about New Orleans, but you're also I don't know. I'll let you explain it. Like, if you just want to jump in about your background, you're a crime analyst. You've got a ton of experience, but you've done a lot of different things. So give us the intro on who Jeff is and what led you to the point now where you're writing about your crime analytics.
Yeah, I'm a crime analyst and consultant based in New Orleans, born and raised here. Went to the University of Texas, which I realize I'm wearing on my shirt.
Boiler up. Oh, sorry.
And was in DC for 7 years. I worked for DoD for a year doing internships, and then was at CIA for 5 years. Moved back home 12 years ago and got a job as the first analyst that NOPD had in decades. Which, when you get your first analyst and you haven't had one in decades, you do the sensible thing. You sort of stick them in a closet. At the time, they didn't know what to do with an analyst. And there were certainly officers that were interested but there was no like analytic program, there was no analytics team, there was no integration and things that they do have now, but that they didn't have back then. And so I did that for about 18 months and left to start my own thing. And so I've been consulting, working with the New Orleans City Council, doing public safety consulting with them. And now I have a company and we do consulting around the country. Um, and yeah, so that's going well. And part of that work is doing a lot of writing. Quite honestly, the writing is marketing material for me. I've worked for large bureaucracies, and so for me, it was a way to get my stuff out there, but also it's a way to inform people about crime trends. It's public service. It's a way to um, hopefully move the data conversation forward and create a voice for doing that. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why I enjoy writing and speaking about these types of things.
Well, you bring a very unique voice to your writing, which I really appreciate. I'm so I got to go back, right? Because that's not too many agencies can say that they have someone from the agency, right, that comes in to be a crime analyst. So that's an interesting pathway, going from DoD, CIA, and then into the municipal level crime analytics. Am I allowed to ask you what you were doing? Were you doing analytic work with the CIA, or am I going to have the
ask
black
whatever you like. I
helicopters?
don't have to answer.
Well, yeah. So is your name really Jeff, or are you Bob?
Yeah.
That was always my favorite. Uh,
I was doing analysis and they teach you how to write. The ability to write is so lost in this world, and to write in a way that people understand it and you can convey complex ideas. And so that I think was a major advantage. Whenever people ask me like what the most important skill set is, I think it's the ability to write and to communicate. Because you can be the best analyst in the world and you can have intense coding skills, but if you can't communicate that either up your chain of command, if you're within a department, or to the public at large, if you're not, then it's kind of, you're going to fail regardless.
Amen, brother. Amen. I was a law and society. I went into the service right out of high school. So I was in the Air Force, and then I came back to Purdue, and I was a law and society major, which I would never recommend. I mean, it's not a bad, I guess if you're into sociology, because it's more of a sociology major than it is a criminal justice major at Purdue. It kind of preps people for pre-law, but the, yeah, I was an English minor though, with an emphasis on creative writing. And between my bartending skills, because I bartended at night while I was going to school, and my creative writing skills, I think those two things might have prepared me better than anything else for working on the street as a cop.
Yeah.
So how to deal with drunks, how to talk to drunks, and then how to write that shit down afterwards, so people know what you were doing. But
It's crazy the skills that end up mattering the most when you
yeah.
do very random jobs.
Well, now we have AI, and sadly, I just all the stories that are coming out here in the last couple of weeks about the studies are saying AI is making us dumb. So,
Yeah,
of
I believe
course,
that.
I believe it too. It's but and I don't want to get too far off track, but I was reading some Gallup data this morning. It's pretty fascinating. I don't know if you get the Gallup newsletter,
I don't.
uh, but they were talking about the question really was is how long are you going to resist using AI, and how big of a role do you think AI is going to play in your life and in society? And I was shocked. One of the statistics right now was that only 13% of people in the US are using AI on a daily basis, tools like Gemini, Chat GPT, others. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was 56% of people said that they were going to resist using it as long as they could. But in contrast to that, it was like over 80% of people felt like AI was going to have a much larger impact on society than like the evolution of the internet and the smartphone, the desktop computer. And it's like, so they like these things, they like, they I don't know. It's the human factor involved, right? Which is a lot of what your work is trying to interpret. But I just
Yeah,
found that curious.
and I feel like my work at least is kind of at the cutting edge of these analyses. And AI is good if there's a body of work that can explain what to do. I love using ChatGPT for five coding needs. If I'm like building a dashboard, I want to do X in Power BI. How do I do that? Great. It's a great tool. Um, it is not precise enough, and it is not accurate enough, and it is not forward leaning enough to do kind of like what are the trends that we're seeing now. If I write down what those trends are and put it on the web, AI can pick that up and tell somebody else what the trends are. But as far as kind of the analyzing new data, I don't know that it's particularly effective yet at the kind of work, especially given how flawed crime and policing data can be. And you may see a trend, look, there's a 30% decline in thefts. Theft is really falling in the city. Like, well, no, they didn't report fully in April. So they reported two thefts when normally they report 100 a month. So there was a reporting issue that you kind of would need to know to pick that up. So I think that's kind of my stance on AI, which is leaning away from the it's essential for me for everyday use, but definitely not in the I'm going to resist it or there's nothing that AI can do for me, is kind of how I see it.
Very, yeah, that's you sound like my middle son is a he's an electrical engineering student at Purdue, and he also codes and stuff. So that's what he says. He's like that's where AI is the biggest benefit for him is just in kind of speeding up some of these processes that otherwise you have to do manually, but you still have to check it and make sure things are running correctly. But all right, so you just went right in because
Sorry.
yeah, no, this is great. So I was very fortunate I'll go all the way back to 2008, 2009. I was just coming off out of patrol, I was working a local drug task force. I was a supervisor there. We got rolled up into an FBI Safe Streets task force. But at the same time, Purdue University had a project over there from DHS where they were partnering with STEM universities and saying, hey, we want to start using your expertise to develop tools that we can use at DoD, public safety, other things. So they have these vaccine center of excellence. Dave Ebert was the professor running the computer science department that was in charge of this project. And my chief at the time, he called these things roses, where he would give you these projects, like he would hand you a rose, like you may want the rose, you may not, because a lot of those roses always have thorns. But he gave me a rose and said, go over there, and they're looking for community partners to work with or someone to interpret what they're doing and help steer them on um, what they're doing. And Purdue has it's still to this day, I can't remember what the name of it is, but they have one of the largest supercomputers for any university, big computer science department. Young PhD students there. They were working on this project called iValet, which was a data visualization tool, and it was pretty cool. So it was kind of like an early version of a digital blotter. Like when crimes happen, you could instead of pinning a map in your
Yeah.
office, when you're trying to track certain things, you could actually drop a pin and have a digital tag on it. And so therein began my journey in this, trying to, as a layman, not a computer scientist, trying to understand machine learning algorithms, and working with people that really understood that at a very high analytical level. And it's funny because they had tools that, as it evolved over the years, I eventually became chief, and I stayed involved in those projects. There are a couple spin-off companies came up out of them, but there was one tool in particular that certain three-letter agencies were looking at that they were very interested in, and so I was there one day, talking through with a couple of them, how we were using this technology and why. And that was Bob and Mary. That's why I was who what's your name, Bob? Oh, what's your name, Mary? Okay, Bob and Mary Smith, I'm sure.
Get that.
Anyway, that kind of threw me down this like into this rabbit hole. And then, simultaneously, around that same time frame, I mentioned this to you on our call that we jumped on a few weeks ago, but I went out to Harvard to the state and local leader program that they have out there in the summers.
Mm-hmm.
And there I got introduced to Bob Bain, who wrote the book, The Performance Stat Potential. And Bob Bain and Moore, they were professors at Harvard that worked with Bill Bratton when he was in Boston and before he moved down to NYPD. But they were kind of there at the beginning of ComStat. So it's a long kind of intro into saying like I've for a long time I've had this strong interest in the data analytics side of it, looking at where the technology is going or where it's coming from, where it's heading, and then trying to apply these things in a practical framework and in really in ways that can benefit the officer on the street and administration. So again, I wish I'd have found your work about 7, 8 years before I found it. You could have
Oh,
really
yeah.
helped me out.
It wasn't, it was just barely out there back then. So it's been interesting. So I left NOPD, started consulting, and um, the first place I turned to was 538, which was the election data
Yeah.
journalism website, which sadly is no more. But I think around like 2015, when I started writing, was like really influential, especially in that it was kind of the only place doing real solid, dedicated only to data journalism. There were data journalists doing other things, but no real website dedicated to it. And so I did that. And then when ABC bought 538, they were into like sports and elections, and I didn't do either of those. So um, my stuff kind of got shoved aside, and I worked at New York Times doing freelancing for them. And then the Upshot kind of decided to, which was their data journalism sort of thing. They that has sort of gone by the wayside as well. So I guess I'm just, everywhere I go seems to die as a data journalism website. Um, and so now I do some freelancing, but I mostly just publish on my own, and it's kind of easier. I do miss having an editor. I think that my work suffers from not having someone else look at it and edit it. My wife is always like, you had a typo in paragraph 6. I'm like, yeah, well, trying to edit and write everything yourself is not easy. So.
Yeah. Well, having an editor too, an executive editor, I could go into stories about this, battles I had with my local newspaper, but um, it's having someone that can, frame, you just give you outside perspective too. And, um, we all like that when we're writing, we all kind of get into our own little tunnels. So to have
Mhm.
someone to kind of check you a little bit and ask certain questions, maybe we'll come back to that. But I'm curious. So when you got, because we hired our first analyst, my predecessor as chief hired our first analyst. He came from Virginia. He was a great guy, hard worker, and but he came from um, a background outside of policing, doing data work before he got into policing. And at his previous agency, he was doing things that were a lot different than what we were looking for him to do. And, so there was some conflict there. And then really just kind of like, it was interesting because having analysts it was new to policing and, just kind of trying to work through the friction and understand like, hey, what do I need and what can you provide? And how is this going to help us? I'm curious about like because you said you kind of felt like you're like when you maybe those are my words, but like when you first got to New Orleans, like, hey, what do we do with this? What do we do with this guy? Like, who brought you in, and why did they bring you in, and what were they looking for you to do?
So they brought me in. I moved back home. I didn't have a job. My wife got a job before we moved back, which was kind of big for us to have at least one person working. I had the best month of my life job hunting and playing Xbox most of the day as a childless 30-year-old. That was it's like I'm never gonna have this ever again in my entire life. And
That's
so
hilarious.
I sort of I had been in contact with the city government, and talking to them and saying, "Look, I have a unique skill set. I don't know what I can do specifically, but like I have skills that could be useful." And so they created a position as an analyst with their gang unit, um, which I mean, I have thoughts about. It was they didn't really need an analyst with the gang unit because the detectives when at that level are kind of doing their own analysis. And so I think that it's one thing to have an analytics unit and to have one of your analysts work with the gang unit. It's another thing to have your only analyst in the gang unit not doing anything else. So it was a little slow going and it wasn't necessarily thought out exactly what they would have me do. So I did a lot of analyzing cities' gun violence trends, evaluating the impact of the gang unit. Um, they didn't need an analyst to help make cases or anything like that or to build RICO indictments. That was something that they were able to do on their own. And so that was kind of like it's hard, especially when I guess when you're coming either from a different kind of department or even into policing and law enforcement for the first time. Um, it's hard to sort of make that niche and to understand, especially if an agency doesn't have a program set up. The agency is just as is unsure about what to do with the analyst as the analyst is with the agency.
Yeah, and it can lead to a lot of conflict. There's a lot of egos in policing. I don't need some analyst telling me what to do. I remember when
Right.
we first went to laptop computers, we had about how to, a revolution inside the police department. I don't need a computer telling me what to do. I know my job. I know my beat. And then within 2 years, people are like, if their computer wouldn't boot up, it's like, I can't go to work today. My computer doesn't work. And so there's always, I just joke because there's always a period of adjustment while people are just trying to figure out like, where the right needs are and where the fit is. And it honestly, it's going to be different for every police department. New Orleans is a major city police department. They're big. The agency where I come from, we had 150 sworn. And, when I
Yeah.
left, I had two analysts where a lot of agencies that size don't have any. And we had them doing different things. One came from a mathematics background and a computer programming background, and the other one came from working in the State Fusion Center. Doing the type of work like that. I suspect that your gun crimes gang unit was doing. Was helping scour social media, find things that that might be beneficial to an investigator. People, places, things, stuff like that. Not necessarily trends um, and then the real sexy stuff, right? Like, is or are your strategies having an impact on crime overall? And how do you know that? How do you measure that?
Yeah. It was a little bit of that. And I came in August 2013 and they had started kind of like fall 2012. So they'd already made their cases. They'd already identified sort of the hierarchy of the individuals they believed to be in gangs. And um, so it was definitely interesting. And that's why it kind of a lot of times felt like being put in a closet. The officers I worked with are great. They appreciated the work and they they weren't like this guy's coming to take my job or anything like that. I think that they looked for opportunities to work with me, but I think especially when you're talking about an agency that doesn't have anything else, like the closer you can get to the chief level where the analyst can really serve leadership first, I think is better. And oftentimes agencies will be like, okay, you're going to go and you're going to transcribe the major crimes for the week and make up a report that allows for nothing. No, this you're going to put the widget in the factory and it's very set in stone. Or you're going to go build a motor vehicle break-in report every week for detectives in the property crimes unit. And it's like, okay, that's great. You have an entire agency. You're going to assign your analyst to do one specific task for one specific unit. And there's a lot of stuff that your analyst can do that can be maybe more efficient if you only have one.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, this could be we should Well, we could have just an episode on this topic alone. Just like how do you because with the we've had a few over the years, and we went round and round a few times until we all kind of settled in, and and sometime I think with one of our previous analysts, his frustration was that we didn't have, like, there wasn't a playbook for him, so to speak. And
Yeah.
we were kind of building the playbook as we went. And we were experimenting with some different things. And I'll give you an example. So when I came back from that course at Harvard, that was the performance stat concept, it really stuck with me. And it was really just about and built, quite frankly, on just the ComStat trends. And it's really just kind of understanding not just what your numbers are, but what's driving your numbers, and then creating a visualization for it. And it's, I guess, in a very simplistic way, just being able to understand and explain the numbers. And so the maybe this would help frame this, just coming from my perspective, because like I'm big into wellness too. Like, I did my first like officer wellness lecture back in the late 90s, when I saw data on cops are dying really young. They die really, really young and have bad health outcomes. And I'm like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
like this is my career field. So it's just like, I don't want to die when I'm 50, when I'm 55, or, I don't want to be miserable in my retirement, like some of the people that I'd seen. So, I kind of, in my work in health and wellness, I realized, there's a lot of parallels that go between that and really in policing. And, just trying to understand, like in policing, we're very reactive, and we like to treat symptoms and, try to find that hammer to smash the symptom. So if you like make a comparison to medicine, it might be, well, oh, you go to your doc, you get your labs done. Well, you've got really high cholesterol, take this statin. Your blood pressure is really high. Here's a med for your blood pressure. And now it's like, hey, you're you know overweight, like 80% of all cops in America. So here's a shot you can take now. And it doesn't really actually get to the point, what's driving the dysfunction. What's causing my blood pressure to go up, what's causing
Yeah.
my high cholesterol, what are the environmental factors, what are the things that I'm doing that might impact this. And so I I'm I run a program, the kind of the slang term for it, it's insulin resistance and the first responder, but we call it the blood doesn't lie because that just resonates a little bit better with cops. But one of the ultimate things that we learned is insulin resistance is often the root cause of a lot of these other issues that we're having. So that's what I would consider the prime suspect in the metabolic health crisis we're facing in policing. So when you apply that same principle to data analytics, and crime in and of itself, and this is kind of where I wanted to go with this conversation today, is like, in law enforcement, we really do see these patterns, right? Murder rates are going up and down. If murder rates are going up, what's the simple and easy response from a law enforcement leader might be, well, it's because, we've lost a lot of people and we need more detectives. We don't have enough people to work these. Or, hey, we're struggling with retention. Well, it's because salaries aren't high enough. We need better salaries and benefits. And, so we start throwing out recruitment bonuses, and, they're all downstream responses, and they're not really getting in. And at some point, you got to figure out where the bodies are falling into the river, rather than just trying to keep rescuing people and pulling them out. So one of my real strong interests in your work is, like, I see a lot of the stuff that you're writing, and like I like here, I'll kind of, my first question for you is, like, as an analyst, did anyone ever have you work on, like, obligated versus unobligated time for your staffing and your allocation of your workforce, and even trying to understand is, what is the right number of police officers for your police department? Because I would posit to say that Most people don't know. They have no idea what the right number is. So they don't know how to right size their agency.
Well, so I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. We do that work consulting with a lot of agencies. We're partnering with 21CP, 21st Century Policing, building out dashboards and an ability for agencies to understand, okay, here's our public safety demand. Um, if you want, so if you know this is the number of hours that we need to spend responding to incidents, to calls, and this is how long it's going to take. And then if we want to do patrol, if we want to do anything on top of that, then you need to add officer hours. But you can use your CAD data to measure the demand and work from there. As far as right sizing agency, we come across this all the time. I mean, it depends. What do you want your response times to be? Oftentimes, it comes down to it's not so much what is in New Orleans. New Orleans had 1,160 or 1,200 officers and recruits back in 2019, and they're below 890 today. So huge decline since in the last 6 years. And they spent $80 million starting in 2022 to start recruiting more officers. Huge pay raises, huge bonuses for recruitment and retention. Worked great on the retention side, total failure on the recruitment side. So it's hard to hire officers these days. And so when we talk about, and every few years in New Orleans it comes up, how many officers should we have? We used to have 1,600 when the city had 80,000 more people, or 100,000 more people. We had 1,400, and then we had 1,200, and now we have 900. The right number is the number we have right now. And because just the reality, especially for a lot of bigger cities, you can't really hire people. You can hire, you can maybe meet attrition, you can maybe grow a little bit. Your goal should probably be to grow a little bit each year. But if you want to rebuild 30% of your force, that's going to take you 30 years. And so what we preach as consultants is acknowledge what you have now and become more efficient in doing the other stuff. That brings down response times, enables your officers to do the things that at 900 officers, you would expect them to be able to do at 1,200 officers. And so with New Orleans, the big advantage has been that they implemented a contractor to respond to non-injury traffic accidents, which I know not every state allows, but Louisiana is allowing, and has had a dramatic improvement in response times. And they hired about 100 civilians to take calls over the phone, to answer calls on the internet, to be civilian investigative responders. If you have a vehicle burglary, it occurred sometime overnight. You wake up at 8:30, you see your car was broken into. They didn't steal much. You call law enforcement out there. Your choices are an officer will come at some point because this is the lowest of the priorities, or you can send a civilian out there. You don't need a gun and a badge. There's no perpetrator in sight. So there's ways of dealing with this. In New Orleans, the city went from about a 50-minute on average response time in 2019. In April 2023, right before the contractor was hired to handle the non-injury traffic accidents, response times were 180 minutes on average. 3 hours on average to respond to whatever call for service. It's come down again. Now it's about 50 to 60 minutes on average, thanks to all of these changes, even though they have fewer officers now than they had in 2023. So whenever we have these conversations, I think it's rather than throwing out a number and kind of doing the math and figuring out how many you have what you have. And if you're in a bigger agency, you're probably not going to be able to change that reality. So instead of trying to think what should the reality be, let's work about how do we improve service development, service delivery, in spite of the fact that we have fewer officers. The Donald Rumsfeld quote comes to mind always, that you go to war with the army you have, not the army that you wish you had or hope to have at a future date. I mean, that's, I don't want to, I hate the warriorization of policing and all that, but like that the concept is, I think, sane, that like you work with what you got, and if you have what you have, find ways of being more efficient, and because there's definitely ways to change things and be more efficient.
Well, we have a tendency to box ourselves in policing, oftentimes, especially around vernacular and different things. But Yeah. So ultimately what I'm hearing there, and this is what you get, right, is um, how many officers should you have? Well, what do you want your response times to be? And then the other thing that drives it is workload distribution. You want to do you want a fair and equitable workload. You don't want 10%
Yeah.
of your workforce handling 90% of your work and 90% of your workforce only doing 10% of the work. And that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I uh, I do find it curious that in policing, I guess and I know it's just not government work and in government work in general, but a lot of times, yeah, there's a lot to touch on there because when I have these conversations, we eventually changed the name of our ComStat program. We called it Focus Meetings, and we were it was we kind of took this prescriptive model. We call it a prescriptive model of policing because what we wanted to do was identify, what our problem, what were that 2 to 5% of issues that were driving 80% of our workload, and then be very strategic and tactical about who we pick to work on those problems, and then designating some outcomes that we were looking for, and then going back and measuring it on a recurring basis to evaluate, is it still a problem? If so, why? Is it not a problem anymore? Okay, what did we do that was effective? Just kind of manage that. But you know in the end, let's just say if you go to, and maybe your experience in New Orleans would support this kind of position, but if you have 30 officers on a shift, the kind of the running joke is like that 10 of them will do everything they can to avoid any work. Like they'll be the backup Bobs of the world. Like they'll always be, the third responder. They'll always be second or third to arrive, even though they were the closest, to the call. And then you have 10 of those officers are going to do a lion's share of the work. They don't care. Like they will run call to call to call because they love the work. They're engaged. They're going to do everything they can. And then the 10 in the middle, it's just really going to kind of be, the whims of the day, or what's going on at home. There's a lot of influences. Some days they're really hard chargers. Some days, they kind of struggle. So this rule of thirds kind of applies. And then, but what happens oftentimes in policing is like, if you're in the top 5% of your shift or the bottom 5% of your shift in productivity and workload, you're getting paid the same. Your time off is the same. And in most cases, your performance evaluations, if your agency even does them, are going to be the same or very similar,
Yeah.
because you have a supervision issue. You know, and so what winds up happening is that it creates an imbalance in your shifts. It creates burnout for your people that are your high performers, and so you really do have a lot of low performers in your workforce that aren't driving any value in your numbers. So like if you want to take a value based perspective from this, like, yeah, that's, so I go back to, that, what are we, one of the things that we just started doing in our ComSat meetings was, for all of our shifts, we measured, every officer's, all their activity every month and their obligated time versus their unobligated time. And that was one of the first things that my analyst, was able to do, was help us build the algorithm to, automate that process as much as we could by pulling all that CAD data out. And so on a regular basis, we could look and see every month when my commanders came into my staff meetings, we knew what every officer was doing. And so if I had an officer that was um, below their mandatory minimums on contacts, or their obligated time was 20%, their unobligated time was 80%, I wasn't there to browbeat their commander. I just wanted to make sure that they knew that that was going on. And so,
Yeah.
that goes back to the old, what gets measured gets managed type of philosophy. And just that process alone kind of changed the way that a lot of our command staff looked at, okay, well, yeah, everybody's getting paid to do a job. It doesn't matter if you've been here for 1 year or 20 years. We still need everyone to drive value. Certainly, we understand that there's people are at different points of their careers where what the output you're going to get might be a little bit different, but experience counts for a lot as well. So that's a kind of a long diatribe, but I think oftentimes that gets overlooked is number one, like you have to maximize the people that you do have and you can't burn them out. But when you don't manage them properly, you contribute to the burnout. Like if you allow low performers to be low performers, eventually you're going to lower, the benchmark because the high performers are going to be like, screw this. I'm out here busting my ass.
There's a famous I guess infamous moment in New Orleans in 2023 or 2022 when everything was bad. Highest murder rate in the country. Again, response times had tripled, up to several hour response times. Just all the officers could do was go call to call to call. There was nothing beyond just responding to calls, and they were going call to call to call and not making a dent in their backlog. And so there was one moment in the French Quarter, an 8th district, NOPD 8th district, which does the downtown in the French Quarter. He was in the middle of his shift. He was probably been there a year, and he just walked off. That was it. It was just like he'd had enough. And I think about that as like a lot of times these are just young people that are learning a new profession, that are trying to do their best. And it can be very challenging to sort of handle that appropriately. And so a lot of that, how do you optimize something like that? How do you make it so that you're not burning out your officers while also managing them appropriately and ensuring accountability? And you mentioned changing CompStat. I think CompStat is designed, at least initially, was designed to be sort of combative and very heavy emphasis on accountability.
Yep.
And I think that lends itself towards, okay, we're gonna, why haven't you fixed robbery in your district? What are you doing about it? And when I look at kind of national big picture crime stats, I think, well, sometimes it's just out of the control of the department or the city government at all. And so is it healthy to be like putting all of this responsibility for something that a police, the captain in charge of your district can't control to begin with? And you're going to hold them accountable for that. In a combative manner rather than sort of a cooperative teamwork. Okay, here's a problem. How can we shift resources? How can we better understand what we're doing wrong? How can we look at things beyond just crime? Because I think police departments that only see their effectiveness and their role as crime fighters, I think, are missing a big part of what society is asking law enforcement to do. And so doing all of the other stuff, are we doing all of the other stuff effectively? Are we responding to our incidents in time? Are we missing a lot of stuff? Are we making sure that we're providing services to domestic violence victims? So all of these things that I think police departments can measure and still have accountability for, that don't require combative. Why aren't you guys working hard enough outside?
Yeah. A couple of things there. That's it. And you're right. It's interesting. I do think the early days of CompStat did require that though, because inside of policing, it was kind of a tail wagging the dog mentality. Like, we're the police, we'll do what we want to do, or we'll not do what we want to do. And then plus, so here is an example. I won't say his name because he still works for NYPD, but I had a really interesting conversation with him while we were talking about the early days of CompStat. He was talking about when he was a young officer coming right out of the academy, his very first night, his partner, they got into, he's excited. He's out on the street. He's got his partner, and he it's a midnight shift and his partner drives into an alley, backs up into this dark alley and parks and, leans his seat back and pulls his hat down over his eyes and basically says, if anyone calls us on the radio, you wake me up and tell me. Other than that, you sit there and shut up, And, so you have this contrast of this old wily veteran who's not going to do anything, and this young, eager officer that's like, hey, this is not what I signed up for. And, so that conflict there, well, what's that young officer to do if they're in an environment where, they have no influence over what they're even going to be able to do? So yeah, that's, it creates a lot of internal conflict. It creates a lot of organizational conflict. But when you look at that and juxtapose that with what NYPD was back then, really, I mean, what Bratton brought to NYPD was, kind of, whether you want to call it, the exploitation of broken windows, but it was really just kind of emphasizing the small things and doing it like, and he tells the story about that, right? Like, I think it was a marijuana arrest on on the subway when he first took over there. Like if you made a low level misdemeanor arrest early in your shift, you're gone. You're off the street for the next 12 hours. Like I can't remember but it was a substantial amount of time because the way that they did their booking process. So this is, I guess the example is that there's a process in place that works counterproductive to community safety because the officer has to take that guy in. He's got to book him in. And then he would have to write his report, and then he would have to take that report and affidavit to the court, and then he would have to bring the guy before a judge. And then once he was done there, then if he could, if he was going to lockup, then he would take him to lockup. Where that's a long time. That's a long process in a huge major metropolitan city. So, like when I look at like the way that an arrest worked for me as a young officer, if I saw somebody, let's just say the same situation, I stop somebody, they've got illegal drugs on them, narcotics. I develop my probable cause. I put them in handcuffs, put them in my squad car. I drive them to the jail. I pull into the Sally Port. I drop them off, and then I leave. And then I go right back out, and I'm right back out on the street 15 minutes later. I still have a report to write at some point, but I'm still out there in the community. Whereas, the other model is like the way that the system was set up, it was very inefficient. So there's, so if, like to your point, if you want to blame the police or a police commander for the crime in a district, when it's really the system that's designed, that's, what they call that the fundamental attribution error, right? You blame the people for a systems problem. And I don't care who you put in that seat, right? Which commander you bring into that beat. If you don't change the systems and, use, I guess, for leadership and, not just on the police side, but, in New York's case, it was Rudy Giuliani who made a lot of changes at the DA's office to change some of those things up. Like him or dislike him, the processes change, and that allowed them to be more efficient. So, yeah, that's a long ramble again. So in New Orleans, you said you guys went, like I said, New Orleans. It depends on where you're from, how you say it, right? I know if you say Louisville, and someone's from Louisville, they'll get mad at you.
New Orleans is like nails on a chalkboard. Just say that.
It's like New Orleans, right?
Yes, New Orleans.
New Orleans. Okay. All right. So I think it was like 2014, 15 timeframe. I switched insurance companies. So I won't say which insurance company I had, but I get into I'm knocking on wood, the only like at fault crash that I've ever had as a driver in my church parking lot in my brand new minivan on a Sunday morning. I cut the curve too sharp because the turning radius on this car was a lot different than my old one, and clipped my back end, the front bumper of another car. So I'm on private property, which in my city, this was in the neighborhood community, but in my city, that would require calling the police. Police would show up and do a property damage crash report. It's kind of like you were talking about. But in the city I was in, they didn't send officers to private property crashes. So I get on my insurance company's app. I get the owner from the other car. I took a few pictures. I completed some fields in an app. And in 10 minutes, I did my own little, field investigation, submitted it to my insurance company. And within 24 hours, that was completely resolved. Like everything was done. No police interaction. And I couldn't help but to think about that, like for a lot, and I still think about that to this day, obviously, because I'm telling the story. But from a policing perspective, like if you were to capture the amount of time that it would take for number one car act, let's just say it's in your local Dick's, parking lot. Crash happens. People, you call 911 or, because people do that sometimes even for property damage accidents, right?
Yeah.
Where you call the police. And if you got the blue screen of death, like in a really busy agency, that's what we called it. Blue screen meant that every car was booked on an active call. And most likely every one of them had calls waiting for them in the queue stacked. When they clear one, they go to the next, right? So that now, depending on what's in the queue and what's in the stack, the next call that comes in may bump that one down, or you may get a chance, or it may stay where it's at, right? And so when the officer has free time, he can drive there. So the call into dispatch, that's a dispatcher's time, takes 5 to 10 minutes to enter that into CAD. Dispatching a call, however long it takes, whatever that officer is doing, he needs to go. Let's just say he's maybe he's not involved in an active case, but he's following up someone he thinks is involved in a crime or a drunk drive or something like that. Now he's got to stop what he's doing, go to this property damage accident, write this stuff down. And the way it used to work, right, is you get there and like literally you break out your notepad and you write down their name, their date of birth, the social security number, you handwrite the VIN number, you write the plate number, you do all these manual task work. You ask them what happened. You ask the other driver what happened. And most insurance companies, parking lot crashes are going to be no fault crashes anyway, but you're there to document what happened. And then when they leave, you go find a spot, you sit there and you do the transcription work. You spend the time to write all that stuff in. You say, I, officer, Flannelly, responded to the Dick's parking lot and reported of a property damage crash on arrival. I spoke to driver one. He said this happened. Here was his vehicle. Here's his plate, blah, blah, blah. And then I spoke to driver two. Here's what he said happened. And that, that's if you're really fast, you can do that in 20 minutes. And then that crash report goes off to your supervisor. A supervisor has to review it and say this is good or not. And then it goes into your records division. They process it. If you have a traffic division, maybe it goes there. They process it and then it goes off to the state. And so you've created about 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours of administrative work. And then I go back to that app and like that was done in 10 minutes. No involvement with the police department. That just, so look at all that time we could recapture if we had better systems in place and the right technology to help the officer. So that's a long way of saying, now for the analyst, right? Here's, you still want that data though, right? You want that driver's name. You want their date of birth. You want their license plate number. You want their VIN number, because you never know if that car has been involved in a crime in the past, or if it's going to be involved in a crime in the future. You now have an anchor point, right, to come back to. So this is where I get into where I think we miss big opportunities on, I think step one was bringing civilians in to do that, because you can pay them a lower wage. And you can drive customer satisfaction higher because you can get there faster, because you don't have to worry about them, having to respond to other things. but technology can do that even faster than a civilian employee. And if you build the systems the right way, can do it more accurately. And you can still capture all the data that you can report to the state for where your crash is occurring, what might be causing, what's contributing to your crashes. You're just doing it in a crowdsourced way rather than a police officer way. Now I got to shut up though, because now I'm just rambling.
No. I agree. Next question.
Yeah. Yes.
The that's the beauty, I think, of hiring contractors or civilians, is that they're just so much easier to bring on board. It's so much easier to fire if they don't work
Yeah,
out.
that's true.
And there are certainly ways that technology can improve it. My mother-in-law got into a fender bender, really minor, leaving a parking lot, and so it was near my house. She had two of my kids in the car, so I came and got the kids and brought them home, and then went back to wait with her. And like the other car, nobody's hurt, but people think, oh, we'll wait for the police. And they're like, well, how long is it going to take? And this was a couple of years ago. And I was like, wait, I built a dashboard that lets you see. And it was like, the average response time is like 4 hours and 13 minutes in our neighborhood to a non-injury traffic accident. They were much faster, but it was still like 60 something minutes. And, you also like, nobody's hurt. The damage isn't bad. Do we really need to give a ticket to somebody to like adding insult to injury of this like bad moment, when insurance is going to take care of it for both sides? And so there's a lot of things that I think that you can do that improve that experience. And what we found is that having a contractor lowers response times. Having somebody else respond to half of the non-injury traffic accidents actually lowers the amount of time it takes NOPD to respond to non-injury traffic accidents, because their backlog isn't so intense. So it has all of these benefits, and I think has it. And I'm sure there are other ways to make it more efficient, so that the insurance company gets what it needs, which, especially in a non-injury fender bender, is probably in 99% of them, 99.9% of them, is the most important thing, is just that like insurance will take care of it. And there are going to be ones that require an officer. Certainly if there's an injury or someone doesn't have insurance, or there's questions of fault or things like that, then yeah, you might need an officer. But if you can get rid of most of them, and that's the kind of like efficiencies that I think agencies should be looking at in order to meet their needs of having fewer officers available, and it just, improving service delivery while also acknowledging reality is kind of the goal.
Absolutely. And the benefit to having somebody there, and so my wife works in the insurance industry, and she worked claims for a long time. She worked auto claims. So she and I would get into these conversations a lot. Because when you're working claims right now the claims adjusters have to settle the disputes between drivers about who may or may not have been at fault. Which is kind of funny, because then it's the insurance company that oftentimes led to policy and procedural issues in policing. Like my agency, I can't speak for others, but we got to a point where if there was clearly an at-fault driver, it didn't matter that they, it's the insult to injury component was removed, and you wrote a ticket, because what would happen in court is, if you didn't write a ticket, then the argument would be made that the police officer didn't determine fault because they didn't write a citation. If the police officer would have determined fault, they would have written a citation. So, so now these defense, so this is like just a great example of how something as simple and seemingly minor as a property damage accident with no injury can wind up being like this complex, systematic discussion about processes, about who's responsible for what and why. And in the end, right, it's society that is trying to make the best determination. Nobody wants their insurance rates to go through the roof, right? If you live in a no fault insurance state, you know the difference. or if you've moved from a fault to an at fault to a no fault insurance state, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the rates are different. So it's like, then it becomes, well, why should I have to pay for a higher rate if I'm a good driver? I've never been in an accident. Um, yeah, I digress. So, but the underlying concept is there, right? Is like, how do we capture these things and do it? And my philosophy is if there's a technology that's available now that can eliminate administrative tasks that someone in my agency has to currently do, and we can do it more efficiently and more accurately, then why wouldn't we do it? And
Yeah.
so when you get into a cost perspective, well, oh, that technology costs a lot of money. It's like, okay, well, how much does it cost? And then, what's the cost of having a person do the same thing? And what's the cost of missed opportunities? I call it the lost opportunity cost, right? Like when we have people doing tasks and things that could be done more efficiently otherwise, um, they're not free to do the things that we want them to do. Like we want our police officers to focus on those core crime issues, which gets me to um, your article from the other. I think it was maybe even was just yesterday. Of course, I had a whole. It just changed everything I wanted to ask you because you were talking about response times, and
Always.
I'm just really curious because response times are like, you want to improve response times. Like what a lot of agencies did in the post COVID world was they stopped responding to about 30 to 40% of the calls that they used to respond to. So they literally just eliminated them. Said, the police are not going to these calls anymore. So that'll impact response times. But I'm just really curious about your work on that and what kind of got you going down that path.
Um, what got me going down the path is that it got really bad here. And like back then, really bad was like it went from, 50 minutes on average to 80 minutes on average. And what we see is when police are slow, especially when they're like really slow to respond, incidents don't get reported. So if it's, midnight, you're leaving your buddy's house and you realize your car was broken into, you know, they stole some pennies out of the ashtray or something like that, but nothing really was taken. You're maybe if you get a 20-minute response, you'll call the police department because you feel like a civic responsibility to call and make sure that this incident is being counted. You know that the vehicle burglary clearance rate is really low. So maybe it's like 1 in 15 of these are going to get solved. So you're probably not going to get the satisfaction of knowing that that there was that deterrent effect of a case being cleared or anything like that, but maybe it's worth it to report it. um, but if you know that it's a 4 hour wait, you might say you call it in and then you're like, all right, I'm not actually going to wait here for 4 hours. At 4 a.m. the officer gets there because they finally cleared their backlog. There's nobody there, there's no victim. You call the number, but the guy's sleeping because it's 4 in the morning and your phone is on do not disturb. And so the officer writes unable to locate or unfounded or gone on arrival or something like that. And so
UTL, GOA, UTL. That's how
yeah,
it's categorized.
as responses get longer, the share of responses that receive a GOA or a UTL or an unfounded disposition increase. And so, it matters when you're seeing, let's say, a surge in vehicle burglaries, but it's not showing up in the data because you're not responding to it, half of them. And so the share of those vehicle burglaries that are gone on arrival go from 20% to 40%. And so the 911 data shows that a lot more people are calling 911 about vehicle burglaries, but when you're reporting your official stats, you're not seeing the problem because your response times are so bad. And then you get the really tragic life and death scenarios. There was in New Orleans a number of times where somebody had called police for domestic violence and the officer had taken a long time to get there and the person had left by that point. And that happened 2 or 3 times. And then the next call was that the person had been murdered by the abusive significant other. There were a lot of times where like rape and sexual assault victims were getting, because hey, at 3 p.m. I was sexually assaulted and I'm calling now and it's 8 p.m. They are going to NOPD because it's not an emergency per se. They're going to deprioritize it. It receives a longer response. And then by that point, the person may have left the hospital, may have left wherever they were. Um, and so you're basically victimizing people of really tragic offenses, victimizing them differently, but victimizing them again from the state side. And so I think about response times a lot because it's something we can measure. It's something that we don't have good national standardized data, and sort of like a city of our size with our number of officers should have a response time of X. So we don't have those standards in place, and lacking all of that, there are really, really negative consequences that occur when response times are lower. In addition to, like, when response times are faster, you find witnesses on the scene, you increase the odds of catching the person on the scene. If you respond to a robbery in 3 minutes, yeah, the offender might be nearby. If you respond in 15 minutes, the offender might be further away. And so your chances of clearing a case are better with faster response times. So all sorts of benefits, I think, to faster response times, and a lot of downside to longer response times. And it's just not something that we measure as well as we should. And so that's why I'm really interested in it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and again, I go back to the fundamental attribution error there, right? And oftentimes, sadly, it's the officer when they get there, because an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, the first thing they get is a beration for why did it take you so damn long to get here? Like,
Yeah.
I pay my tax dollars and I expect you to, people have an expectation that when you call the police, they're going to show up. And so when you don't show up, then it gets very frustrating, especially if you're someone that doesn't call the police very often and you're the victim of that. Let's just say, but you're that person whose car got broken into overnight, right? Like you want to do the right thing. Maybe it was just some spare change out of the ashtray, or, well, do cars even have ashtrays anymore? But
I don't know. They have like little things where you can put things. I don't know.
yeah, the cup holders. Uh, that that can be equally frustrating to both parties because the officer wants to help, but you can only do what one person can do based within the call volume that you have. So that's where technology and management principles come in. But it's also like one of the dangers that we're looking at right now. Regardless of what you feel about Doge, good, bad, or indifferent, I think there's a lot of things that are good that are going to come from it, just from questioning systems that have been placed for a long time. But the last I saw, there was a concern that we might lose funding for the National Crime Victimization Survey, right?
Yeah, it sounds like that we're going to be okay on NCVS.
Okay, well, that's good.
They're going through census surveys, and NCVS is like, if you and I were paying for NCVS, we'd say, yeah, that's expensive. Like, it carries a price tag. But compared to UCR, and like to have the ability to understand crime trends in a different manner, NCVS is really cheap. It's like $20 million or something like that. So it's not expensive.
And for people that don't know what that is, that's a survey that's done annually where we determine like how many people that have been victims of crime actually report it, and at different types of crime. And I think last time I looked at it, I think it was like property crimes. I think it was like 52% of property crimes in America.
I think that's too high. I think it's
unreported. I thought.
No, I still think that's too high. It's something like a quarter. Well, maybe it's so like a quarter of thefts, tiny share of burglaries, and 75 to 80% of auto thefts get reported because you need the insurance claim.
Yeah.
So you might be right that because of that split, but it's usually around 50-ish% of violent crimes get reported, and that doesn't include murder victims. Excuse me.
Oh. Yep. Oh, you got to sneeze. Let it go.
No, excuse me. So yeah, it's usually a much smaller share of most crime types, which really reinforces that. All right, we feel pretty good about the murder numbers. We feel pretty good about the auto theft numbers. Everything else, we can maybe feel confident that the trends we're accurately measuring, but the bottom line numbers we know are inherently wrong. So I just pulling up 31% of, or 29.9% of property crimes in 2023 were reported, and 50.6% of violent crimes, excluding simple assault, were
3 out of 10,
reported.
folks. Three
Yeah.
out of 10.
And only 50% of non-murder violent crimes.
That's
So
crazy.
you think about like aggravated assaults or
Yep.
robberies, you expect almost all of them to be reported, and they're not.
And aggravated assaults generally tend to be like, well, now it's NIBRs, but they tend to be your highest number of quote violent crimes that do get not they don't occur quite as frequently as robberies and not nearly as frequently as homicides or shootings, but it can be a very good kind of barometer for the safety of a community. So I'll go back to my work at Purdue and with Abish is he longtime PhD graduate now, but they had a company. It's called Devista Technologies, and the software is Heimdall. But we worked on this as far back as 2015, 16, 17, because I wanted to move away from going back to our discussion on patrol allocation, uh, response, like response time, average response time. Let's say you want it to be between 4 and 7 minutes for a serious crime, and you want your workload distribution to be equal, right? So generally, people will divide a city up by geography and then by call volume inside of that geography. So one district or one beat, regardless of how people, agencies call them different things, but it might be like one might be a once, like a 5 or 6 square block area, where another one might be 5 or 6 square mile area. And inside of those two geographical areas, the call volume might be the same. Response time might be similar, but when you're thinking about if I only have 30 people to divide up to cover this area, where do I put them? That's going to maximally be beneficial to the workload distribution and response time. The problem with that is like where I would get a little frustrated is because then I go back to that rule of thirds. And if I have some people that are, constantly positioning themselves in areas where they don't have to respond or to be the last responder, then that throws off the balance of workload distribution. So I wanted to design this. I wanted Abish to help me build these algorithms where we could deploy resources based on what we were finding in our data, like what were the calls for service that were trending in our area, not necessarily so much. And some people call it predictive policing. I never really liked that term because it was a bit of a misnomer, but it was really just kind of anticipating, putting your people in the areas where these types of crimes were likely to occur, and then actually being more prescriptive by saying, hey, look, in this geographical area, these are the 5 things that we're seeing, that are popping up the most, like whether it's auto theft, car break-ins, domestics, aggravated assaults, drunk driving around bar districts, things like that. So, the idea being you're specifically tasking people on where you want them to be, at what times you want them to be there, and what you want them to look for, rather than just kind of randomly driving around or just responding constantly to radio calls. And it's hard to do that if 7 out of 10 crimes aren't being reported, right? Like you're only, so your predictions, you're making your best predictions on 30% of the available data. Where if everybody reported, just think how much more precise and accurate you could be with your predictions. So, it's hard to blame a person for not calling the police if they're going to wait 4 hours to have someone like, shit. At some point, their time is a lot more valuable than the idea of the societal benefit that we're going to get from. Well, anyway, it'll lead me into a whole nother conversation, really on like why that's kind of important, because like it goes back into that, opportunity cost. Like if let's just say you got it up to 75 to 80% of these car break-ins were being reported, as an analyst, what's that going to give you? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as an analyst, it'll give you confidence in what you're seeing, the picture that you're seeing. Um, in theory, it will give you, you'll get a larger sample of clearances that will tell you, maybe give you a better idea of offender patterns, a better idea of you know, where they operating, things like that. Um, and it gives you the ability to describe the actual trend better and to put more confidence in your answers of what's happening, to not have to worry that, okay, am I seeing a trend or am I seeing a reporting issue? um, I think removing the idea of the reporting issue just gives you confidence that what you're saying is correct. And so I think it's a relatively straightforward benefit, at least as I see it.
Yeah, and so here's where a lot of people I think miss one of the most important things about it too is every one of those car break-ins is an opportunity to capture a piece of information that can help solve a larger pattern. Um, and I used to so the example I used to use with my staff was burglaries. Right, so I brought in like 30 people from my agency, from detectives, patrol, our street crimes unit, and we just did this exercise where we were talking about like for an average burglary, like just work through the workflow of a burglary report for your organization. And um, let's just say it happens. Well, like the example I would say is, hey, I came home from work today, or you get a call in your 911 center at like 5 o'clock, and someone says, hey, I just got home from work and my back door has been kicked in. I don't know if there's anyone in my house or not. Right. So, like, that could be a burglary in progress or not. We just don't know. So, you're not going to tell the person to go in there. So, um, you know, they have to wait for the police to get there. The police, depending on what their call volume is, right, are going to get there when they get there. If they think that, hey, the person's outside of the house, they're not in immediate danger, they may not run lights and sirens to get there. Or if they say, hey, I think someone's inside my house, that's going to change the type of response. Either way, the officer is going to get there on the run of the mill stuff, right? Door's been kicked in,
Mhm.
and hey, do you know who did this? No. Do you have any security cameras set up? No. Okay, well, what's missing? Well, my laptop was sitting on my kitchen table. It's gone. There was a few things around. Maybe my flat screen TV got ripped off the wall. What, like a gun got taken out of my bedroom drawer, something like that. Okay, well, what's your laptop brand? It's an iPad or an Apple. Okay, what's the serial number? Oh, I don't know. What's the
Yeah.
model? I don't know. Hey, what's the brand of your television? I don't know. What's the serial number on your firearm? Those generally we can eventually find, but let's just say two or three things. That's the officer's handwriting that stuff down, and if there's calls in the queue, right, and they're waiting, then they're going to move on. Like they if they have time, they might go knock on the neighbors' doors and say, hey, your neighbor's house got burglarized. Did you see anything? Do you have any cameras? Like it's going to depend on workload if that stuff gets done or not. But and I could go on for hours about this too, because in generally, like, there's some really good Pew Research data too on like the amount of neighbors that actually converse and talk to their neighbors anymore, which is it's very low. Um, like, I think it's 1 in 5 neighbors can name, I think, two people that live adjacent to them. Um, that'll be good data for you to look up. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but um, yeah,
Yeah, I think another challenge for the law enforcement responders is that if you got just a burglar alarm going off, 98% of the time, you know that it's probably going to be a false alarm.
yeah,
And, the wind blew it open. I had the dog set off the motion detector, something like that. And so um, it's going to be very rare that you get, oh, this was a burglar alarm went off. This was an actual burglary. And, and like, and there's somebody in the house that you need like an emergency response. If you get 20,000 burglar alarms, most likely zero of them, maybe one, will be a situation like that. And so that's obviously the highest risk scenario. But from efficiency standpoint, you you can't respond to every 20 all 20,000 like it's you drop everything else that's happening and respond like that. But you also don't want to be not responding like that to the one that is the emergency situation. So it's a really, really difficult, I think,
Yeah.
decision there
So,
to make.
yeah, I mean, in the end, right, the short version of this very long story is if only 50% of those burglaries are being reported, then maybe there's a chance that one other house on that same street got burglarized at the same time. There's a heroin addict or someone that lives close by, and if that one would have been reported, maybe there's a Ring doorbell camera that captures a white van driving by.
Hmm.
So now we have this little piece of connection. And so this is where ultimately we'll have to save this maybe for another future conversation, but that's ultimately where I do think AI and having tools like that can start to really capture large amounts of data that people just can't keep track of, especially in an understaffed, overtasked police department. Um, because when you're just trying to survive, you're just really worried about where your next breath of air is coming from, and you can't really think about like, where am I swimming to? You're just trying to keep your head above water.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
all right, I've rambled a lot. So many
That's
things I
been
want to,
great.
yeah, so many things I want to get in touch with, but I know you've got to run here in a few minutes. So, you know, um, I I do want people like to go and read your work. I really do because just talking about murder rates, clearance rates, overall, how those things impact community well-being, community safety. Like that's, I think the true value of analysts is helping us understand the big picture, what's happening. And so maybe one quick, if I were to ask you, like, I have tons of questions, but like, if you were going to build a program from scratch where an agency was going to bring in an analyst, like, what practice would be non-negotiable, and what would you want them to focus on right from the start?
Um, I don't know that I would. I mean, I wouldn't say that like there's one subject matter, whatever subject matter matters the most. Um, there's that old Omar Bradley quote that amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. I think that the key is not like what they're working on, but where they're situated bureaucratically, hierarchically within the agency. The closer you can get your analysts to leadership, to the chief, to the deputy chiefs, to the district commanders, the better. And I think that there's a tendency to just sort of stick the analyst as low on the totem pole as possible as this civilian newbie. But I think creating a space where the analyst can, one, hear what is most important to leadership, and two, deliver products that sort of fit those needs. That's, I think, the most important thing for analysts and for agencies that want to truly integrate their analysts appropriately.
Okay. Um, where can people find your work? I know you're at Jeff Analytics, but for your company itself, if people want to know more about your work, or if they're interested in learning about, hey, what technology should I bring in? What should I have my analysts working on? How do I bring in this consulting team to help better my agency? Where can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, we're at Age Datalytics. Check out the Real Time Crime Index, where I have my Substack newsletter. We're about to start a YouTube channel and start hopefully providing, I know not everybody reads Substack, so hopefully providing more information to people that are looking for information on crime data in different environments.
I think LinkedIn is throttling Substack, by the way.
Is it?
I,
Twitter
maybe you
definitely is. I haven't seen
maybe you can
LinkedIn.
maybe you can help me with this, but when I publish on my Substack, and then I'm fairly new to Substack, but my newsletter on LinkedIn, um, when I bring my Substack into that, like the reach just plummets. So,
Yeah.
not that I have a huge reach as it is, but um, yeah, I mean, is there any one question that I didn't ask you today? I mean, I got about 1,000 that I want to ask, but
We'll have to do it another time.
all right, all right. So Jeff Analytics on Substack. If someone can they reach out directly to you there? Is there an email, like, or you go to the website? I'm sure that your email is
Yeah, yeah.
ah,
Hopefully
is it
easily
analytics?
findable.
All right. Well, everybody, I'm gonna have to shut up. I got so many things bouncing in my brain right now that I did not get out because, as usual, I get sidetracked
Next time.
with interesting conversation. So I do want to thank Jeff for your spending your valuable time with us. I'm just gonna have to send you an email with all my other questions or set up another time to chat. Appreciate the time. Thanks for being here. And I guess until the next time, you're just going to have to stay in suspense, read his work, and we'll be 1042.